Leaders from across the Nordic region gathered in the Swedish capital for a summit of the Nordic Council, joined by European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. The meeting focused on two priorities dominating Europe's current agenda: support for Ukraine and regional security amid growing tensions with Russia. Cameras followed the arrival of von der Leyen and the Prime Ministers of Finland, Denmark, Iceland, Norway and Sweden, as well as representatives from autonomous Nordic territories, including the Faroe Islands and Åland. Inside the press hall, the atmosphere reflected both coordination and concern. With the war in Ukraine entering another difficult winter, the discussions centred on how the European Union can secure sustained financial support for Kyiv while bolstering its own defence preparedness. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen opened the press conference with remarks that praised the Nordic region's approach to readiness and resilience. She told the assembled leaders and journalists,
"I think of the Nordic countries as the Polaris of the North. We would say the North Star of Europe, because very often you show the way. First, on readiness and preparedness. I think we can all agree no one does it like you. In the North, readiness runs through society."
Her statement underscored how the European Commission views the Nordic nations as models for civil defence and strategic planning. Von der Leyen's praise came at a moment when Europe faces continuing instability on its eastern flank and internal debate over how to finance long-term assistance for Ukraine. She reiterated that clean technology investment and industrial competitiveness remain equally critical to Europe's security. In her words,
"Clean tech is where smart money goes. We want the future of clean tech to be made here in Europe. And for this, we must retain our industries, our talents, and our jobs. In a world of fierce, often unfair competition, we must support more clean products made in Europe, strengthen key sectors from cars to batteries, and secure access to the critical raw materials with our new Resource EU plan. That's the goal, and we will stay firmly focused on it." Thank you very much.
Her comments linked economic resilience to defence readiness, arguing that Europe's ability to sustain Ukraine depends on a robust, self-reliant industrial base. The Commission's proposed European Resources Plan is designed to reduce dependence on external suppliers for materials crucial to electric vehicles, batteries and renewable energy technology. For Brussels, economic security and national security have become inseparable. Finland's Prime Minister Petteri Orpo spoke next, highlighting how Russia's actions have transformed the strategic landscape in Northern Europe.
The war in Ukraine and Russia's reckless behavior at the Baltic Sea region have made our region a hotspot. This has changed our work in the European Union and our work amongst the Nordics. The small countries of this region know that we need to work together to be stronger. And this is what we have also discussed today.
Orpo's statement reflected Finland's sharpened security posture since joining NATO earlier in the year and its commitment to deeper regional coordination. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen delivered one of the most direct assessments of Europe's current threat environment.
Right now we face the greatest threat since World War II. Russia is trying to weaken our societies and to divide us. But they shall know that they will never succeed. So first of all, we have to continue our strong support to Ukraine. They are the first line of defense for the entire Union and our continent. Secondly, we have to rearm ourselves. I'm very pleased that we now have an ambitious roadmap. We have to be able to defend ourselves by 2030 at the latest. And I think all of us in the Nordic region want to work even closer together on defense readiness.
Frederiksen's reference to 2030 points to Denmark's participation in EU and NATO efforts to scale up defence spending, joint procurement and regional force mobility. Her language signalled that Copenhagen views collective rearmament not as an option, but as a strategic necessity. The conversation then turned northward. Iceland's Prime Minister, Kristrún Frostadóttir, acknowledged her country's unique role. A NATO member without its own standing military, she emphasised vigilance even for nations that traditionally rely on diplomacy and hosting arrangements rather than armed forces.
That we can't be naive in that region either. And we've seen very quick developments when it comes to sort of security culture in Iceland as of recently, that we're aware of strengthening our presence in that area, but it needs to be on our terms. Iceland doesn't have a military, but we've been an active part of NATO, so we're strengthening our host nation capabilities, and we're also always emphasizing, even though we have a very strong Nordic cooperation and a strong EEA cooperation, that the connection with the US is always going to be a strong backbone to everything that we do.
Her remarks underscored the enduring transatlantic dimension of Nordic defence policy, anchored in NATO and close coordination with Washington. While Nordic governments invest in joint readiness, they see US engagement as the strategic backbone of regional deterrence. Norway's Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre addressed growing concerns over Russian weapons testing in the Arctic. He noted that Oslo has long monitored such activities given its proximity to major Russian nuclear facilities.
It is a long tradition that Norway follows very closely testing of Russian military technology in the north. We live 100 kilometers from the world's largest nuclear arsenal. And I think one strength of NATO is that we are ears and eyes to follow that. This is not weapons directed primarily against us, but it is a strategic weapon for Russia. And I think it is a worrying sign that so much emphasis is being put into these developments. And what we learned over the last days, I think, is not a complete story about this potential missile, because that has had a very mixed story in its testing.
His statement highlighted Norway's role as a key NATO observer in the High North and its concerns about opaque Russian missile activities that could alter the region's security balance. By emphasizing mixed results, Støre suggested uncertainty over the technical reliability of Russia's latest systems, but also cautioned that incomplete data should not lead to complacency. Sweden's Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson focused on the European Union's decision-making process concerning aid to Ukraine. He addressed recent divisions among EU members regarding the release of long-term funding.
And obviously, we didn't reach a conclusion last European Council, but we did take a major step, a necessary step, to be able to make that decision. And in this group, you can really count on that we are very decisive on our will to make that decision on the European Council in December.
Kristersson's comment made clear that the Nordic governments intend to push for consensus in December to unlock new financing for Kyiv, a package stalled by political disputes within the EU earlier in the year. Returning to the podium, Norwegian Prime Minister Støre added a note on societal resilience, extending the security conversation beyond military affairs.
Some of us are now putting proposals out for an age limit to access social media, which is also an important part of looking after what I would say daily life security of our youth, improving their school results, improving their mental health. There's no way around addressing this issue. And by doing it together in this family, we also stand stronger.
His statement reflected growing Nordic coordination on information safety and mental health protection as part of a broader concept of national security. Throughout the summit, officials repeated that unity, both regional and European, is the key message to Moscow and a prerequisite for continued support to Ukraine. Discussions also covered energy cooperation, Arctic infrastructure, and supply chain resilience. While these topics received less public attention than defence, they remain central to the Nordic agenda of long-term strategic autonomy. The summit coincided with Europe's preparations for a decisive EU Council meeting in December, where member states are expected to finalise a multi-year financing framework for Ukraine. Officials in Stockholm expressed confidence that a compromise will be reached, despite earlier disagreements between Brussels and some national capitals over the scope and funding mechanisms of the package. Several Nordic leaders emphasised that failure to reach an agreement would send the wrong signal to both Kyiv and Moscow. the presence of von der Leyen in what may be one of her final appearances as Commission President before the EU's leadership transition gave additional weight to the discussions. Her participation underlined the European Commission's effort to keep Nordic countries aligned with Brussels on both economic and security policy at a time when budget negotiations and political divisions challenge EU cohesion. Visuals from the event showed leaders standing shoulder to shoulder as photographers captured the closing moment of the press conference. Among them were Ursula von der Leyen, Ulf Kristersson of Sweden, Mette Frederiksen of Denmark, Petteri Orpo of Finland, Kristrún Frostadóttir of Iceland, and Jonas Gahr Støre of Norway, joined by Axel Vilhelmsson Johannesson of the Faroe Islands and Katrin Sjögren of Åland. The images symbolized the shared stance of small but strategically significant states navigating a new era of European insecurity. In broader context, the Nordic Council summit in Stockholm reflected how Northern Europe has evolved from a peripheral region to a frontline hub of European policy coordination. Following Finland's and Sweden's integration into NATO, the region now represents one of the most cohesive security communities in the alliance. Its governments coordinate on defence procurement, surveillance, cybersecurity and joint military exercises, often serving as an early warning network for Europe's northern flank. Ursula von der Leyen's characterization of the region as the North Star of Europe captured this perception, a reference to both geographic position and political reliability. Her comment drew quiet acknowledgement from the Nordic leaders, many of whom have publicly framed their cooperation as an example of how Europe can remain united under pressure. The summit also advanced economic themes tied to EU industrial policy. Von der Leyen's emphasis on clean technology and resource independence aligned with Brussels' ongoing push for the Green Deal industrial plan, a framework that seeks to keep high-tech manufacturing inside Europe as competition intensifies with China and the United States. By linking that agenda to Ukraine's financing, the Commission signalled that EU strategic autonomy includes both energy transition and defence resilience. Finland and Sweden, both heavily invested in battery and raw materials industries, have been leading advocates for this integrated approach. Officials said the EU's new resources plan could open funding channels for Nordic mining and processing projects vital to the bloc's energy independence. Von der Leyen called the initiative a way to retain our industries, our talents and our jobs in the face of global competition, an argument that resonated across the region. At the same time, Nordic leaders reiterated that no amount of economic planning can substitute for credible defence. Denmark's Mette Frederiksen warned that Russia is attempting to exploit social divisions across Europe through disinformation and political manipulation. Her insistence that Russia will never succeed framed the Nordic response as one of determination rather than fear. Observers noted that all Nordic governments now operate under elevated security protocols with expanded defence budgets and cross-border coordination mechanisms that were rare before 2022. Norway's continued monitoring of Arctic military activity remains another regional priority. By drawing attention to Russia's nuclear capabilities just 100 kilometres from Norwegian territory, Støre reinforced the need for NATO's presence in the high north. He described Norway as the eyes and ears of the alliance, a role that places it at the centre of strategic intelligence sharing between Europe and the United States. Iceland's Prime Minister Kristrún Frostadóttir expanded that theme to include non-military resilience, emphasising the importance of civilian preparedness, infrastructure protection and digital security. She stressed that even without armed forces, Iceland's membership in NATO and partnership with the US remain a strong backbone to everything we do. Her remarks illustrated how smaller states contribute to collective defence through hosting, logistics and surveillance roles. For Sweden, this year marked a transitional moment. Its full entry into NATO has aligned its security doctrine with its neighbours, while also intensifying domestic debate over defence spending and military infrastructure. Kristersson's commitment to secure an EU financial deal for Ukraine demonstrated Stockholm's effort to balance national priorities with broader European obligations. In their collective statements, Nordic leaders made clear that support for Ukraine is not a temporary policy, but a long-term strategic investment. Several noted that Kyiv's resistance directly protects Europe's own security architecture. As Fredriksson said, Ukraine is the first line of defence for the entire European Union and our continent. This view has become a shared principle across the Nordic region and is expected to shape EU policy debates into next year. Beyond the immediate focus on war and financing, the summit also acknowledged domestic security challenges such as digital safety and youth mental health. By introducing social media age limit proposals, leaders like Jonas Gahr Støre connected these issues to the broader concept of daily life security. The Nordic approach to security thus extends from military deterrence to the well-being of citizens. The summit ended with a joint photo session and a short statement of confidence that a solution on Ukraine financing will be reached at the December European Council meeting. While no formal agreement was signed, leaders agreed to continue coordination on defence industry projects and energy security. Diplomats described the session as constructive and forward-looking. As delegations departed Stockholm, officials summed up the message: Europe's north intends to stay united, ready and prepared, principles that echo Ursula von der Leyen's words throughout the summit. In the north, readiness runs through society. That phrase captured both the spirit of the meeting and the strategic outlook of a region determined to keep Europe secure, competitive and cohesive as the war in Ukraine continues.